Every Saturday, I went out to play poker with my friends until midnight. It turned out that every Saturday while I was gone, my fiancée invited her ex over for coffee. When I accidentally walked in on them while they were doing it, they panicked so badly they tried to call the police. Every Saturday had become identical, so predictable that it felt harmless. I left the apartment at the same time every week, carrying the same jacket, telling the same half-joke about cards and bad luck. Poker nights were my release valve. A few hours with familiar faces, cheap beer, and routine arguments about hands that should have folded earlier. Nothing wild, nothing secretive, nothing that ever threatened the life I thought I was building. Qley liked that I went. She never complained about the noise or the hours. She never asked me to skip a night or come home early. She treated it like a healthy habit, something responsible couples did to give each other space. Looking back, that encouragement feels different now, but at the time it felt supportive. She would remind me if I was late getting ready. She would hand me my keys. Sometimes she would ask what time I planned to be back, not in a jealous way, more like she was setting her own clock. We had been living together long enough to fall into shared assumptions. Groceries appeared in the fridge without discussion. Bills were split automatically. Plans for the future existed without urgency. There was talk of dates and venues and families visiting. Nothing felt rushed, but nothing felt unstable either. That illusion rested on routine, and Saturdays were the strongest pillar. Trevor hosted the games most weeks. His place was close enough that I could walk if I wanted, far enough that it made sense to stay late. The table was always set up before I arrived. Cards were shuffled the same way. Seats never changed. We played until midnight because that was when everyone decided it was reasonable to stop, not because anyone checked the time. I rarely looked at my phone. I trusted that if something important happened, Qley would call. That Saturday started wrong in a way that felt insignificant. One of the guys texted that his car had died and he would not make it. Trevor suggested starting later or canceling. Nobody was enthusiastic enough to reschedule. We played a shorthanded game that felt off. The rhythm was gone. Hands moved too fast. Conversation stalled. I lost interest earlier than usual, which almost never happened. Around 10:30, Trevor's upstairs neighbor came down complaining about noise from a different apartment. The interruption broke what little focus remained. People started packing up chips without finishing the round. Someone joked about calling it early and getting real sleep for once. I checked my phone out of habit and saw no messages from Qley. That felt normal enough, but something in me had already disengaged. I decided to leave without announcing it like a big thing. No dramatic excuses. I just stood up, wished everyone a good night, and walked out. The air outside was colder than expected. The streetlights looked harsher than usual. I remember thinking how quiet the block felt for a Saturday. I did not text Qley that I was coming home early. There was no reason to. I had never done that before. The idea did not even occur to me until later, when it mattered. Our building had a side entrance that most residents ignored. I used it sometimes when I did not feel like dealing with the lobby. That night, I went through it automatically. The stairwell echoed as I climbed. The light on our floor flickered like it always did. Nothing about the approach warned me. The apartment door was unlocked. That alone was strange. Qley was careful about locks, almost obsessive. She checked them twice before bed. She checked them again if she woke up at night. Seeing the handle turn without resistance made me pause, but my first assumption was carelessness, not danger. The lights in the living room were on, brighter than they ever were that late. Music was playing softly, not loud enough to hear from the hall, but loud enough that it should not have been. Shoes sat near the couch, not mine. They were not placed neatly. They were kicked off. My brain tried to make sense of the scene before I stepped fully inside. Every assumption arrived and collapsed within seconds. Nothing fit. I moved forward anyway. Qley was there. So was Sean. The image did not register all at once. It came in pieces that refused to connect. Her posture was wrong. His hands were where they should not have been. The couch cushions were pushed out of alignment. A coffee mug sat on the table, but it was empty, cold, and irrelevant. Nobody spoke immediately. There was a moment where time did something strange, stretching long enough for everyone to understand what had been exposed. Sean's face drained of color. Qley reacted faster, scrambling away like proximity itself had become dangerous. My body locked up. There was no dramatic explosion, no shouting, just a physical awareness that the life I had assumed was stable had been hollowed out quietly, week after week. Sean moved first. He stood up too fast and knocked into the table. The mug tipped and spilled nothing. Qley was already reaching for her phone. Her breathing was sharp and uneven, not controlled, not strategic. This was not something she had rehearsed. I asked what was going on, but the question barely left my mouth before it became useless. Nothing they could say would reshape what I was seeing. Qley started talking anyway. Words came out disorganized and desperate. She kept repeating the same fragments. none of them forming a complete explanation. Sean did not look at me. He kept scanning the room, like he was searching for an exit that did not require passing by me. I took a step back without realizing it. Not in fear, but in disbelief. The apartment felt smaller. Familiar objects looked staged, like they belonged to a set rather than a home. Sean suddenly said something about misunderstanding and timing and how this was not what it looked like. The statement collapsed under its own weight. There was no alternate version of events where this scene became acceptable. Courtney's panic escalated instead of settling. She stopped trying to explain and started trying to control the situation. She told Sean to get his things. She told me to calm down. She told both of us too many things at once. Then she said something that shifted the air completely. She said we needed help. Not counseling. Not a conversation. Help in the immediate sense. She looked at her phone again, fingers shaking, and said this was getting out of control. She said she felt unsafe. The word landed wrong, like it had been selected from a list rather than experienced. Sean latched onto it instantly. His eyes snapped toward her, then to me, then back to her phone. He started talking fast, too fast, layering urgency onto her fear. He said this could go bad. He said someone needed to be called. He said this was not a private matter anymore. I realized then that they were not panicking because they were caught. They were panicking because they needed to flip the situation before it stabilized. If things stayed still long enough, the truth would sit there unchallenged. Courtney stepped away from me and moved toward the far end of the room, creating distance like it was a boundary she could point to later. Sean positioned himself closer to the door, not blocking it, but claiming it. His body language had shifted from guilty to defensive. I told him to stop, not as a threat, not loudly, just firmly enough that it should have grounded the moment. It did not. Courtney raised her voice instead. She said I needed to leave. She said this was escalating. She said she did not know what I might do next. Each sentence pushed reality further away from what had actually happened. Sean nodded along, feeding off her fear. He told her to call. He told her it was better to be safe. He told her not to risk it. When she lifted the phone to her ear, the room went silent except for her breathing. I stood there, stunned not by the betrayal anymore, but by the speed at which it was being repackaged into something else. She started the call. That was the moment I understood how badly this was about to get. The call changed everything immediately. The room shifted from chaos into performance. Courtney's posture straightened even as her voice shook. Sean moved with purpose now, no longer scrambling, but arranging the scene around him. They were not trying to escape anymore. They were trying to redefine what had happened before it could settle into fact. Courtney paced while speaking, describing the situation in vague, alarming terms. She avoided specifics, but leaned hard on emotion. She framed the moment as sudden, intense, unpredictable. Sean stayed silent during the call, but his expressions said enough. He nodded at the right moments. He widened his eyes when she glanced at him. He made himself look smaller, less confrontational, like a witness instead of a participant. I stayed where I was. Moving felt dangerous. Speaking felt like it would be twisted into something else. I realized quickly that anything I said now could be repurposed later, repeated without context, flattened into accusation. The apartment no longer felt like mine. It felt like a stage that had been set without my consent. Courtney ended the call and told me officers were on their way. She said it like a warning, not an update. Sean exhaled, relief cutting through his panic for the first time since I arrived. The power dynamic had shifted in their minds. Authority was coming, and they believed it would land on their side. I asked Courtney why she had done this. The question was calm, but it did nothing. She answered with deflection, not explanation. She talked about boundaries and escalation and how this could have gone differently if I had not surprised them. The logic bent backward on itself, but she delivered it with conviction. Sean chimed in then, adding weight to her words. He talked about raised voices that never happened, about tension that existed only because they created it. He framed himself as someone who had been concerned for her safety long before I arrived. Each sentence built a narrative where I was no longer the wronged party, but the unpredictable element. I started to understand that they had rehearsed something like this, not the specifics, but the strategy. If discovered, redirect. If cornered, escalate. If exposed, seek cover in systems that respond faster than truth. There was a knock at the door. Sean opened it too quickly, eager, almost grateful. Two officers stood in the hallway, calm and neutral. Officer Morales introduced himself first, his voice measured and practiced. The second officer scanned the apartment without stepping inside, taking in the scattered shoes, the displaced furniture, the charged atmosphere. Courtney immediately stepped forward, placing herself closer to them than to me. She spoke first. She described fear, confusion, and an argument that had escalated when I arrived unexpectedly. She said she felt trapped. She said she was not sure what I might do next. Officer Morales listened without interrupting. He asked her to slow down. He asked where everyone was standing when I arrived. He asked how long Sean had been there. Her answers hesitated at the edges, vague where they should have been clear. Then it was my turn. I explained why I came home early. I explained the poker game ending early and my routine on Saturdays. I explained that the door was unlocked and that I walked into my own living room without warning. I did not raise my voice. I did not editorialize. I stuck to sequence and fact. Sean interjected once, trying to correct my phrasing, but Officer Morales raised a hand and asked him to wait. That small gesture mattered more than anything else so far. It interrupted the momentum they had built. The officers separated us. Qley and Sean were asked to stay in the living room. I was guided into the kitchen. The physical distance broke their ability to coordinate in real time. I could hear muffled voices through the wall, but not words. The waiting felt deliberate. Officer Morales asked me to clarify details. How long had I and Qley lived together? Whether Sean had ever been invited into the apartment before. Whether there had been prior conflicts. Each question tightened the structure of the story, turning it from emotional fog into a timeline. I answered carefully, not defensively, but precisely. The truth had a shape. I let it hold. In the living room, voices rose and fell. Qley sounded agitated. Sean sounded insistent. At one point, someone mentioned coffee again, and even through the wall it sounded absurd. Officer Morales responded with something short and firm that ended the line of argument. After several minutes, the officers switched rooms. I was left alone in the kitchen, staring at a familiar magnet on the fridge that Qley had brought home months ago. The normalcy of it felt surreal. This was the same space where we planned meals and talked about mundane things. Now it was a holding area while my life recalibrated. Officer Morales returned first. He asked if I felt threatened. The question was direct, not leading. I said no. I said I felt blindsided, but not endangered. That distinction mattered. He nodded slightly, like he had expected that answer. He told me that some parts of Qley's account did not align with the physical layout of the apartment or the timing I described. He did not accuse her of lying. He simply stated that there were inconsistencies that needed clarification. Sean was asked to step into the hallway. That was the first real crack. Sean resisted at first, asking why this was necessary, insisting that everything had already been explained. Officer Morales repeated the request without raising his voice. The second officer shifted position slightly, blocking the exit without touching him. Sean complied, but the confidence drained from his face as he passed me. From the kitchen doorway, I could see Qley watching him leave the room. Her expression changed again, something tightening behind her eyes. For the first time since I arrived home, she looked unsure. Minutes passed. The apartment felt too quiet without Sean's constant commentary. Qley sat rigidly on the couch, her hands clenched. She avoided looking at me. When she did glance over, it was quick and assessing, like she was measuring how much ground she had lost. Officer Morales returned again, this time asking Qley to clarify how often Sean had been visiting. She hesitated. The pause stretched long enough to matter. She gave an answer that was too careful, too narrow. Officer Morales asked if neighbors might have seen Sean coming and going before. That question landed hard. Qley's composure slipped. She said she did not know. She said she did not keep track of what neighbors noticed. The response felt defensive, not informative. At that moment, there was a knock from the hallway. The second officer spoke quietly to Officer Morales. I did not hear the words, but I saw the reaction. Officer Morales nodded once and turned back toward us. He said that someone else in the building had approached them voluntarily. A neighbor had recognized Sean and mentioned seeing him enter the apartment on previous Saturdays, often around the same time. Qley looked at me then, really looked at me, and whatever strategy she had left collapsed in her expression. Officer Morales said they needed to continue sorting things out. He asked Sean to remain available for further questions. He told Qley that making a false report was a serious matter and that clarity now would be better than consequences later. The room held its breath. For the first time since I walked through the door, the truth had weighed again. Once the neighbor spoke, the night stopped being about one incident and became about repetition. Patterns do not need emotion to exist. They form quietly, one decision stacked on another, until the outline becomes impossible to deny. I could see that realization working its way through Qley's face as Officer Morales continued asking questions that no longer assumed innocence by default. The neighbor, Linda, was invited inside to clarify what she had mentioned in the hallway. She stood near the doorway, uncomfortable but certain, and described seeing Sean enter our apartment many Saturdays over the past few months. She did not exaggerate or speculate. She described times, not feelings. She mentioned the elevator schedule and how she recognized patterns because her own routine involved taking her dog out late. Qley tried to minimize it. She said Linda must have misunderstood. She suggested coincidence. Officer Morales asked her if coincidence could explain the consistency. That question was not confrontational, but it left nowhere to go. Sean returned from the hallway quieter than before. Whatever he had said to the officers there had not helped him. He avoided eye contact now, his earlier confidence replaced by calculation. The shift was visible. He was no longer trying to dominate the narrative. He was trying to survive it. Officer Morales asked directly how long the visits had been happening. The room felt heavier when the question landed. Qley hesitated again, then offered a version that framed it as occasional and recent. The explanation was thin, and everyone knew it. I did not interrupt. I did not need to. The officers were already seeing what I was seeing. This was not about catching someone in a lie anymore. It was about watching how the lies reacted under pressure. The officers asked about the coffee explanation. Qley repeated it, but it sounded weaker now, stripped of urgency. Officer Morales asked why coffee required secrecy. He asked why it aligned so perfectly with my absence. He asked why Sean never stayed late enough to overlap with my return until tonight. Qley's answers grew shorter. She started appealing to emotion again, talking about confusion and unresolved history. The officers listened, but the tone had shifted. Emotion was no longer a substitute for coherence. Sean attempted to intervene, saying this was being blown out of proportion. He claimed that my presence had escalated things unnecessarily. Officer Morales asked him why he felt entitled to define escalation in someone else's home. Sean did not answer. At that point, the officers separated Qley and Sean again. This time, it felt final. The coordination between them was gone. Without proximity, they could not reinforce each other's version of events. I remained in the kitchen while Qley was questioned in the bedroom. Sean stayed in the living room with the second officer. The apartment felt divided into zones of consequence. From where I stood, I could hear fragments of conversation through the walls, enough to know that Qley's story was unraveling. Timeline shifted. Details contradicted earlier statements. She was trying to adjust in real time, but the foundation was already unstable. Officer Morales returned to me with a notepad in hand. He asked if I had any evidence of Sean's repeated visits. I said no. I told him honestly that I had trusted my routine enough not to question what happened in my absence. That trust now felt like negligence, but I kept that thought to myself. He nodded and told me that evidence did not always come from documentation. He said patterns often left witnesses, and tonight had revealed more than one. Linda left after giving her statement. Before she did, she looked at me with something close to sympathy, but she did not say anything. She did not need to. Her presence had already shifted the trajectory. Qley emerged from the bedroom looking smaller, not physically, but in presence. The confidence she had tried to project earlier was gone. She sat on the edge of the couch rather than claiming it. Sean did not look at her. Officer Morales addressed both of them together now. He explained that calling the police under false pretenses carried consequences. He explained that while emotions ran high in domestic situations, fabricating fear was not protected behavior. He spoke clearly, without threat, but with authority. Sean protested, saying he had not made the call. Officer Morales acknowledged that, then pointed out that encouraging someone else to do so did not absolve responsibility. Sean went quiet again. Qley asked what would happen next. The question was not framed as concern for me, but for herself. Officer Morales said that depended on honesty. He said that if they continued to provide inconsistent accounts, the situation could escalate legally. He said that clarity now would reduce complications later. The silence that followed was thick. Qley finally admitted that Sean had been coming over regularly. She did not specify how regularly at first. She framed it as a mistake that got out of hand. Officer Morales asked her to define regular. She closed her eyes briefly before answering. Every Saturday. The words landed hard, even though I already knew. Hearing them spoken aloud, acknowledged, gave them weight. This was not a lapse. It was a routine, synchronized with mine. Officer Morales asked how long this had been happening. Qley gave a number that felt both specific and evasive. Sean shook his head slightly when she said it. Barely noticeable, but enough. Officer Morales caught it. He asked Sean if he disagreed. Sean hesitated, then said the number was not accurate. Qley turned toward him sharply, anger breaking through her collapse. The coordination was fully gone now. They were contradicting each other openly. Sean admitted it had been longer. He did not give an exact timeline, but he confirmed that it had started months ago, not weeks. He said it casually, like it was already too late to pretend otherwise. That admission changed everything. Officer Morales stepped back and spoke quietly with the second officer. They discussed next steps without including any of us. The sound of their voices blended into a low murmur that felt ominous despite its calmness. When Officer Morales returned, he addressed Sean directly. He said that while Sean was not under arrest, the situation involved potential issues beyond infidelity. He mentioned trespassing concerns, false reporting implications, and the need to document statements accurately. Sean asked if he needed a lawyer. The question came too late to sound confident. Officer Morales said that was his choice. Courtney's breathing picked up again, but this time it was not performative. She was realizing the scope of what she had triggered. This was no longer something that could be contained within the apartment or smoothed over with apologies. Officer Morales asked me how I wanted to proceed regarding the living situation. The question caught Courtney off guard. She had not considered that her position in the apartment was no longer assumed. I said I needed time to think. That answer was honest and non-committal. Officer Morales accepted it. He informed Courtney and Sean that the incident would be documented. He told them that any further attempts to misrepresent the situation could result in additional consequences. He told Sean he needed to leave for the night. Sean gathered his things silently. He did not look at Courtney. He did not look at me. Whatever connection they had relied on routine, and that routine had collapsed. When the door closed behind him, the apartment felt hollow. Courtney remained seated, staring at the floor. She asked if I was okay. The question sounded automatic, not reflective. I did not answer immediately. Officer Morales told me they would follow up if needed. He gave me a card and said to call if anything changed. He told Courtney the same, but his tone was different, more formal. After they left, the silence became unbearable. Courtney finally spoke again, trying to frame what had happened as complicated rather than deliberate. She talked about history, unresolved emotions, and timing. I listened without responding. Her words no longer had leverage. I walked into the bedroom and closed the door behind me, not to isolate her, but to give myself space to think. The apartment I had trusted was now evidence of something else entirely. The truth had not just surfaced. It had spread, and it was not finished yet. The apartment did not reset itself when the door closed behind the officers. Nothing snapped back into place. The couch stayed crooked. The coffee mug stayed cold. The silence was not peaceful. It was accusatory, pressing in from every corner. Courtney remained on the couch, staring at the floor as if it might offer instructions. I stood in the hallway, feeling like the space between rooms had become a border I did not want to cross. I told her I needed air and stepped outside. The stairwell smelled like dust and cleaning solution. My hands were steady in a way that surprised me. The shock had burned off, leaving clarity behind. Patterns do that. Once you see them, you stop arguing with yourself. I walked the block twice before returning. When I opened the door again, Courtney was still there, but she had moved things. The cushions were straightened. The shoes were gone. She had tried to erase evidence through tidiness, as if order could rewrite the night. It only confirmed what had already been exposed. She started talking the moment she saw me. Not apologies, not explanations, just noise meant to fill the space before I could define it. I interrupted her, not loudly, but decisively. I told her we needed to talk about logistics, not feelings. That word landed hard. She stopped. I asked how long she thought this could have continued if I had not come home early. She did not answer. I asked whether she had ever planned to stop. She still did not answer. Silence, when sustained, becomes its own confession. I told her I was staying in the bedroom for the night. She nodded, relieved by the simplicity of the decision, mistaking restraint for reconciliation. I closed the door and locked it, not out of fear, but out of finality. The click of the lock sounded louder than anything else that night. Sleep came in fragments. Each time I drifted off, my phone buzzed. Messages from Trevor asking why I left early. A missed call from Sean that I did not return. A text from Courtney asking if we could talk in the morning. I did not respond to any of it. By morning, the story had already begun moving without me. Linda had spoken to another neighbor. Someone else had recognized Sean from the elevator. Rumors did not exaggerate. They simplified. By the time I checked my phone, the version circulating was clean and sharp. Courtney's ex had been coming over every Saturday while I was out, and when caught, they tried to flip it. Courtney realized it too. She stood in the kitchen scrolling through her phone, pale and unfocused. She asked me what I planned to tell people. I told her the truth did not require planning. That answer ended the conversation. Later that day, Officer Morales called. He told me Sean had come back with a lawyer asking about the report. He told me the attempted call and statements had been flagged as inconsistent. He told me that while charges were not guaranteed, the incident was now formally documented. Sean's attempt to turn authority into a shield had done the opposite. Systems remember. Courtney overheard part of the call and sat down hard at the table. She asked if she was in trouble. I told her that depended on how much she continued to lie. She asked if I was going to press anything. I told her I was not interested in revenge through paperwork. I was interested in distance. The conversation shifted then, away from denial and toward damage control. She asked about the apartment. She asked about our plans. She asked what I wanted. Each question assumed there was still a shared future to negotiate. I corrected that assumption gently and thoroughly. I told her I would be contacting the landlord. I told her I would be removing my name from any joint plans that required trust. I told her she needed to make arrangements to stay elsewhere until we sorted out separation. She reacted like someone hearing consequences for the first time, even though she had authored them. Her family reached out that afternoon, not to me directly at first, but to mutual friends, trying to understand what had happened. Courtney had not told them everything. She had framed it as complicated. The friends filled in the gaps without embellishment. Complication evaporates when repetition enters the picture. By evening, her family contacted me. I did not volunteer details. I confirmed facts when asked. The calls ended quietly. No shouting, no accusations, just the sound of recalibration happening in real time. Sean tried again that night. Another message, this one longer, carefully worded. He framed himself as concerned, as someone who wanted to smooth things over. I did not respond. His leverage had always depended on secrecy. Without it, he was just a man who had overstepped repeatedly and then panicked when confronted. 2 days later, Courtney moved out temporarily. She packed efficiently, avoiding eye contact, narrating nothing. When she reached for something that belonged to both of us, she paused, then left it behind. That hesitation said more than any explanation she had offered. The landlord was pragmatic. Names were adjusted. Terms were revised. Routine dissolved into paperwork. The apartment felt different immediately, not empty, but honest. There was no longer a version of reality being maintained behind my back. Officer Morales called once more the following week to confirm statements. He told me Sean had been advised to stop contacting anyone involved. He told me the attempted report had not gone unnoticed. He did not dramatize it. He did not need to. Consequences do not announce themselves loudly. They accumulate. Courtney tried one last conversation before fully disengaging. She asked if I hated her. I told her hate would require more energy than I was willing to spend. I told her I was disappointed by how methodical the deception had been. That distinction mattered. Mistakes happen. Systems are built. She left without arguing. Weeks passed. Poker nights stopped being Saturdays. I changed the routine intentionally, not because cards were tainted, but because predictability had proven expensive. Trevor apologized for nothing specific, just for not noticing things sooner. I told him nobody notices what is designed to hide. Sean disappeared from the periphery entirely. No messages. No sightings. I heard later through the same informal network that had exposed him that his attempt to control the narrative had followed him into other areas of his life. Trust does not compartmentalize well. Courtney's social circle shrank. Invitations dried up. Plans evaporated. Not because people were cruel, but because patterns had been revealed and people adjust accordingly. One night, I sat alone in the living room, the couch rearranged properly this time, the space finally mine. I realized that the most unsettling part was not the betrayal itself, but how calmly it had been scheduled. Every Saturday, like an appointment,